Tell us a little bit about the Fania All-Stars.
The Fania All Stars is basically the super group of salsa. So it's basically all the band leaders in salsa music get together to make one group, one super group. So in other words, as opposed to like rock and roll music is pretty, usually you have the singer and like a lead guitarist, and one of those two is usually, generally speaking, the driving force or the band leader or something. And salsa music's more like jazz in that the person composing the music and the band leader could be any of them. So sometimes it's the maraca player, and he's writing bass parts and piano parts and horn parts for everybody, but on the ensemble he's just a maraca player. So you'll have a maraca player that's a band leader, you'll have a conga player that's a band leader, Ray Barreto, you'll have a trombone player that's a band leader, Willie Colon. You'll have, so you get the idea. They'll take all the band leaders and make a group. So it's basically essentially a super group where all the best players are, and definitely all the best singers are.
And how were you introduced to people like Larry Harlow and Eddie Palmieri?
Just through growing up, it's just those are salsa legends, Palmieri in particular because he's Puerto Rican. Harlow is more of a strange case because he's this New York Jewish man who went to Cuba to study salsa music and became a phenomenon. But Eddie and Charlie Palmieri are kind of like they're the pride of Puerto Rico.
And the Live at the University of Puerto Rico record is one of the first ones that you got into as a kid.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, all those records, were always around because that's our music, so growing up in Puerto Rico, and even when we moved to Mexico, we still only listened to salsa music. Even when we moved to America, we were still only listening to salsa music. So those are just part of the household,
What about when you got older, when you became a teenager and you're in El Paso? What are some of the early records that you bought at Metal Storm?
Metal Storm. Well, the very first record I can remember getting was Overkill, this band called Overkill, like some metal band.
The Fuck You EP.
The Fuck You record, yeah, and I got it just because it said Fuck You, and I thought that was so crazy at the time, this middle finger. So I got it, and then I realized reading the liner notes as you do when you're into stuff, and obviously before the internet. So when I'm reading the liner notes, it has the publishing credits on it, and I realized that it's just a cover song, and it's this whole other band called DOA, and I said, DOA, what's that? So I started doing research and found DOA and found kids that were into DOA, and then I learned about Black Flag and Dead Kennedys, basically the skaters, and skateboarding, and so it all sort of snowballed from there.
Since we're speaking of childhood, I have a quote for you. If you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales.
If you want them to be even more intelligent,
read them more fairy tales.
Albert Einstein.
What are your thoughts?
That's definitely, he's definitely right. He also says, imagination is everything, and that's it's more powerful than knowledge, and so yeah, I couldn't agree more.
What kind of fairy tales were you read as a kid?
Well, my mother and father had this funny thing where they invented their fairy tales, so they were being creative about things that are already pretty creative in and of themselves, So obviously, like you Little Red Riding Hood and all that stuff, but for the most part, my father and mother would make up fairy tales every night, and so they always would say that it would cause an interesting situation, because they said I was a kid, I was so obsessive that the minute they were done with the fairy tale, I wouldn't be asleep, and I'd say, okay, again, and so I'd ask them to repeat it, the whole thing again, and as soon as he would start to deviate because he had made it up, I'd say, no, that's not how it went. He went to the castle first, and then he got, so it's kind of funny, but that's just how my parents are.
Was there ever fairy tale time as you got older with your younger brother Rico? Did you ever read fairy tales to him?
To Rico? No, I just more played pranks on him, or just would have him hang out sometimes, when we were recording music and stuff. I wasn't too good of an older brother at that point, when he was little. I was always gone at the time, so I had left home at an early age, just kind of took off and then started doing, you know, the whole touring thing with at the drive-in, and so I wasn't around for much. But when I would come back home, you know, it was more like sharing comic books and sharing records and things like that.
Speaking of your brothers, I did an interview with Zex Marquise in 2010, and one of the things they mentioned was being able to witness one of the very first At the Drive-In shows ever done at a neighbor's garage in El Paso.
Yeah.
In retrospect, are there garage shows or backyard shows that stick out to you today?
From back then, I mean, yeah, I mean they all do, because that was just sort of the that was just sort of the thing back then. So I guess, you know, that one definitely sticks out. Any of the ones during winter time stick out just because it was really cold, or any of the ones that got busted, you know, by the cops always stick out, because having to load your gear out in a hurry, you know, it sort of sticks in your mind.
What were some of the most obscure places that you played with At the Drive-In?
Oh man, I mean we played everywhere. So it's a weird sound. So I wouldn't sorry. I wouldn't know what. I mean, they all seem so obscure to me now, but I you know, like I never knew what. And I would hate to insult someone, you know, who's from there and have them say like, oh, what do you mean that's not obscure? But at the time, having toured and stuff, I never knew before we hit these places, like where, you know, Missoula, Montana was, or there's a really great one in North Dakota. I can't remember right now. Sorry, my memory's failing me. My memory's really failing me right. Minot, North Dakota. That was really obscure, and it was an amazing, amazing show. We played there several times, but I had never known of that city until I got there. I mean, I learned more about obscure places when I was a teenager and I went hitchhiking across the country. I got stuck on every single little town, you know, Ely, Nevada, Austin, Utah, you know, just like these weird, small towns where I would, you know, wash dishes for a couple of days until I could, you know, get some money to eat and move on. But yeah, I mean, you know, America's such a big country. I guess a lot of the places could be obscure that aren't, you know, the sort of the big cities that everyone knows about.
How long did you hitchhike across the country?
For about a year. A little less than a year.
And then you ended up back home in El Paso?
Yeah.
While we're talking about At the Drive-In, I did an interview with Ross Robinson in 2009. And one of the things he said was that At the Drive-In initially didn't want to work with him. He said that Limp Bizkit was the Antichrist at the time.
Yeah.
In retrospect, what are some lessons that you learned from working with Ross Robinson that still apply to today?
Oh, man. I mean, there was a lot. For everything that happened, we really did learn a lot working with him, and it was an eye-opening experience. You know, we had generally just worked with sort of more people who were more engineers and things like that, and he was the first person who really like sort of started messing with our arrangements, you know, and really did produce us in every sense of the word. And so I guess that was a big lesson, is just learning to sort of let go and trust somebody. And another big lesson would be to always pay attention, you know. So, you know.
You also worked with Rick Rubin for the first Mars Volta record.
Yeah.
So when you're working in the mansion, did you ever come across any supernatural experiences up in Laurel Canyon?
Oh, sure.
What were some of those?
At least we thought they were supernatural. I don't know. The place just had you know, like locking the windows and putting the latches on at nighttime because you were freaked out to be up there by yourself. And then in the morning they were unlatched and completely open, you know.
Oh.
But it was usually just things like that, things that we would freak out about it and be like, you know, go over to Cedric's room and bring him back and say, you saw me lock these, right? And you saw me put the latch all the way down. There's no way it could just blow open, right? And he'd say, yeah, there's no way. I'd say, okay, I'm switching rooms, you know, like just little things like that. So.
On the topic of the Mars Volta, I know the Mars Volta is pretty much, you know, you're kind of dictating the Mars Volta in a sense. It's like your project. But with Bosnian Rainbows, it seems as if it's more of a collaborative effort. Tell us a little bit about how that project formed, and is control really a sickness?
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. Trying to control everything all the time is definitely a sickness. and yeah, and then Bosnian Rainbows started exactly that, as an exercise in going back to the group mentality, you know, like what we had without the drive-in, you know, and a true collaborative effort, you know, a true group. And so that was the concept I started with, and I wanted to put together a band where everyone in the band, sort of like we were talking about the Fania, where everyone in the band was a band leader. In other words, where everyone in the band had no reason to take orders from anyone else, you know, and there's no like hired musicians or anything. It was like everyone was a band leader, and everybody had all the reason in the world to do their own thing. So making it more of a band situation, meaning that like you got to really want to be here in order to do it, because if not, you could just be doing your own thing. And so sort of the guidelines were that everybody, you know, that everybody be a writer, a composer, everybody be a producer, and everybody be an engineer, meaning that everybody knows how to record themselves and make tracks and propose things. And so you know, so I asked D'Antoni and Nick and Terry to be in the band, and then we took it from there, you know, and we all fit together quite nicely, you know, and that's the thing, again, you know, Terry has the Butcheress, whereas her thing, you know, she has no reason to be here unless she absolutely wants to. Nicky Casper has no reason to be here unless he absolutely wants to. The D'Antoni parts also, you know, it makes for an interesting chemistry.